Good afternoon, and welcome to the closing session of this week's Caribbean Brownfields Virtual Week. It has been an absolute pleasure to be here with you all and to learn about the fantastic projects that are occurring all across the U.S. Caribbean. We are here today with two illustrious panelists. I'm David Southgate with the Center for Creative Land Recycling, and I'm joined by Deanna James, president of the St. Croix Foundation for Community Development. It was established in 1990, and the foundation has been the conduit for over $42 million. It's a Black-run and Black-focused organization with an ambitious program agenda focusing on the territory's social transformation. Most recently, this has included food sovereignty projects, renewable energy projects, capacity building projects for the Black and Indigenous people of the Virgin Islands, building innovative models in these isolated and sometimes rural communities. Deanna has over a decade of executive experience with the foundation and is clearly on the who's who of leaders in the U.S. Virgin Islands, working intimately with almost every single local public sector agency, as well as a cadre of private sector partners and civic organizations throughout the territory. Deanna is a certified professional in human resources, holds a bachelor's degree in English literature from Lehigh University, as well as a Master in Arts and Public Communication from American University in Washington, D.C. And I would also like to welcome Laurie Schoeman, National Director of Resilience and Disaster Recovery from Enterprise Community Partners, Inc. Enterprise is a national nonprofit organization that develops and deploys programs and supports local community organizations, as well as advocates for nonpartisan policy, invest in capital to build and preserve affordable rental homes that serve over 22,000 people, and has over 40 years development experience tied to thousands of local partners, as well as building and preserving almost 800,000 homes with almost $61 billion in community investment, changing millions of lives. Laurie Schoeman is among the shining stars of Enterprise's 1,100-strong workforce. She oversees Enterprise's efforts to preserve and protect affordable houses across the nation from the risks and impacts of natural disaster and climate change. Her team assists community development corporations, cities, states, and federal government in a wide range of communities across the nation to develop housing that can sustain impacts of the natural hazards. And she leads the development of guidance of tools such as the Keep Safe Guide to Resilient Housing and Design in Island Communities, which is available both in English and Spanish. Thank you both. Thank you both for being with us at the close of today's conference. How are we doing today?
Great to be here, David.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to see you both again. We have had quite a conference this week, and I was thinking about all of the different topics that we've covered. We've talked about, disaster capitalism. We've touched on the ideas of disenfranchised Black and brown bodies in these territories, entrenched poverty, land revitalization in the context of all of that, the challenges about migration, aging populations, the challenge of gentrification and erasure of our cultural history and practices amidst this recovery scenario. And so it's so interesting that yet none of these strategies alone that we've spoken about today is really sufficient. And as we were discussing previously, I wanted to share a passage from Elinor Ostrom's thoughts on this idea of panaceas. For those of you who don't know Elinor, she is a Nobel Prize winning American political economist. And I just want to share something, and we can speak about this idea. She says, we call attention to the perverse and extensive use of policy panaceas as misguided efforts to make social ecological systems, also called human environment systems, sustainable over time. She says we should stop striving for simple answers to solve complex problems. The answers are not simple because we have just begun to develop the concepts, technologies, and methods that can address the generic nature of the problem. Characteristically, these problems tend to be systems problems, where aspects of our behavior are complex and unpredictable, and where causes, while at simple sometimes and finally understood, are always multiple. There are multiple causes always. They are non-linear in nature. They're cross-scale in time and in place, and they have this evolutionary character. And she said this is both true for the natural and the social systems. In fact, they are one system with critical feedbacks across temporal and spatial scales. We'll hear Ostrom speaking about social and economic and political settings in which we all do our work, and in which the people who are attending today's and this week's conference do their work. These are the ecological systems that we're challenged with, such as climate patterns, pollution patterns, and the human and environmental flows that are simply not static. It's deep stuff. We can pull the screen down. It's deep stuff. And I wanted to get your thoughts about this sort of multifaceted aspect that really is coming about due to, I think, the increased understanding of the complexities of the challenges institutionally, community, environmentally that we are facing to be able to sustain our communities and cultures. It's a mouthful.
I'll take a stab at that. So one of the things that's really interesting for us at the foundation, and I spend a lot of time being really grateful and in awe of our founders, because they were innovators and they were community activists. And so I think because of the complexity of the issues that were facing the territory when we were founded, and the fact that they were seeking to create a community foundation, community philanthropy without an endowment in the middle of like a massive crisis, they really did a lot of work in trying to understand like the root causes of problems, and thinking and writing a lot about like systemic problems. And I can tell you, in all the years I've been at the foundation, one of the truly eye-opening projects that I had the privilege to work on was an educational initiative where we say we did the 12-step program. We did all the things that, you know, philanthropy does wrong, and spent a lot of money, and then decided to sit back and like let's look at this from a systems perspective. Let's try to really understand like what's at the, you know, at the core of what we're trying to fix and reform. And the recognition from that everything is connected to everything. Like it was just this like, you know, aha moment that like we spent a lot of time thinking like, oh, it's just literacy, or it's just, you know, it's economic development. If we give, you know, small business lending, or if we as an organization focus on revitalizing some, you know, strategic properties in our historic downtowns, that will be it. And all of it kind of came to a head for us when we decided to build this consortium. We've had this long-standing relationship with nonprofits as, you know, the territory's primary fiscal sponsor, and we've supported over 250, you know, burgeoning civic organizations and charity, community-based projects, and helping them sort of incubate until they were ready to become, you know, 501c3s. And it wasn't until we actually like decided to deepen that engagement with nonprofits, to bring all of us to one table and to really start talking and to build relationships, that our understanding of the complexity of systems like was sort of illuminated. And so when I think of like where we are as a territory, you know, I had the opportunity to listen to the session right before on VIAC, and that was one of our projects. And I had the incredible opportunity, I've had the opportunity to sit at the table as that project was being birthed, and there was ideation happening at the table, and all of the people coming to the table playing such an incredibly important role in bringing their, you know, their expertise and their perspective to build this truly innovative, multi-pronged, you know, concept that will have such incredibly deep impact. And so I think about like all of the ways in which we are going about recovery that is reminiscent of how we've done things in the past, and not allowing, you know, diverse voices to be at the table, and, you know, conceptualizing what we're doing, really thinking through what sustainability is about people at the end of the day. It's not about like, a plan. It's not about an idea. It's about people like buying into an idea, buying into a development, strategy, and then making a decision to sustain it. And so I think we're at this really pivotal moment in our evolution as a society and our development as a territory where like we really have to start leaning into the diversity of ideas and perspectives and skills and expertise that we have in our community to really make sure that we are maximizing the opportunities and resources that have come to the territories since the hurricanes.
Absolutely. And I would say that the breadth of experience in the panels that we've seen through the entire week really speaks to this multidisciplinary, multi-sector sort of approach to what we are doing in the Caribbean to rebuild. And we can see how institutional partners, in particular in the last session, can come together to form this network, which you all are already plugged into because you've been doing this for quite a while. But it's really kind of proof of the concept here right now. And Laurie, your organization, and I think you were very key and pivotal in the production of the Keep Safe Guide. Now that Keep Safe Guide really maximizes, I think, the understanding of the social capital that exists within the Caribbean, where people who don't necessarily come from the upper economic sphere are relying on the social capital to rebuild their homes and develop their homes following the disaster. And so your organization developed this with Resiliency and other partners to help communities understand how to best build back and then maximizing this social capital that exists in these communities to train people in these new techniques that will help keep them safe. Do you want to speak to that? You're on mute, dear. There you go.
Great. Thank you, David. I'm proud of the Keep Safe effort. It was an effort that really harnessed all of the brilliance and leadership across Puerto Rico, and to a certain extent, the VI. But we were deeply entrenched in the Puerto Rican community around resilience and recovery, and it really represents a bottom-up, consensus-based approach to designing systems. I don't believe there's a template or one-size-fits-all for anything. Human beings are snowflakes, meaning everyone is different. Every solution is different. There is no one-size-fits-all, and when we try to supersede local knowledge and try to place a template onto communities, it never works. And I have the good fortune of working with Deanna. I am incredibly honored to be on this panel with her today, to see the leadership in the VI, knowing that, Deanna, you're so committed to making sure that we harness and leverage the local community place-based knowledge. And this is important because I work around the country and see that every community has a solution or many solutions that work with that culture, the history, the vernacular, the legacies that culture brings forward. So there is no one-size-fits-all. And when we look at disaster recovery and resiliency, we must consider that, because we must harness the local understanding and insights. And why is that? Well, often when we're looking at resiliency or rebuilding, we're not just looking at what is happening now. We have to remember there's a legacy that presents itself in the moment of disaster, where a community that has, for example, experienced redlining, right, which was a policy that was promoted throughout the United States in communities of color to disenfranchise communities of color economically by basically saying to banks, don't invest here, and grading communities. This plays out today when we talk about climate risk, because communities that have infrastructure that is less maintained or less invested in will fare very differently when there's a flood. The energy grid that is not stable before the storm is no way going to be stable after the storm. So we need to make sure that not only are we looking at the intersectionality of things, but we're also harnessing the insights and the local knowledge, because communities have been in place long before and will be in place long after. So we need to think about how we approach recovery differently. And I'm proud of the Keep Safe project because we did the hard work of spending 2 years in hard, deep conversation with hundreds of leaders across Puerto Rico to ensure that when we created a set of guidance, it would be reflective of the need. Again, no one size fits all and no template approach. So thank you, David, for mentioning Keep Safe.
Sure. And, before we came on the stage, we were chatting just very briefly, and you had brought up Fuller's book, Listen to What They Say. For those of you who don't know, Fuller is a very esteemed planner and community development person here in Puerto Rico. And in particular, when I got that book recently, I cracked open the chapter to my town, which spoke about the disaster of the Memeyes avalanche, the largest mud avalanche in the US history that killed, I don't remember how many people, and how the solution, the cookie cutter solution, was bring in trailers from FEMA, in the Caribbean climate, was basically saying, here, live in this oven, which of course she pushed back on, and they built out incredible homes in response to this. So I think that speaks very strongly to the need to really listen to this local wisdom and have responses. And yet at the same time, we exist not in isolation. We exist in a structure where there is tremendous pressure to respond to the economic forces at the expense sometimes of our communities that are on the front lines, living on the margins or established on the margins of society, because that's where they were allowed to be established. And Diana, I wanted to know your thoughts about this this balance, because as a foundation, you have to balance the interests of community, as a community foundation, the interests of community, as well as the pressures from different funders who are supporting your organization's missions. Can you talk to me about that and what that's like? It's resilience and resistance, I would imagine.
So I'm going to tell you that, like, it's the one thing that I struggled with the most in all the years I've been at the foundation. And yet today, the thing that I am singularly most proud of about the foundation is that our board, they, like, when I tell you, they were trailblazers. In the field of philanthropy, they were trailblazers. And so they were starting out without an endowment. Ford Foundation came in and said, okay, we're going to teach you how to be a foundation. We're going to teach you how to be really good grant makers. And they gave us some money and taught our board how to give it away. And they gave awarded some really great grants, one of which went on to create an organization by the name of VI Care, which became the first AIDS outreach and support organization in the Caribbean. Really dynamic grants, but our board sat back and said, okay, so and what? What next? And what happens if you don't have healthy nonprofits to grant to? Then what? And they decided to really build the organization in deep linkage with nonprofits. In so doing, they had to actually sit back and say, well, okay, so, the conventional foundation strategy says build an endowment concurrent with supporting, the most vulnerable and supporting nonprofits that are supporting them. And how do those two things synergize, and how are they in direct conflict? And they decided they were in conflict, that every dollar we raised for an endowment, to sit in an endowment, was a dollar that was not going to be put to use and deployed in the community immediately. And so we did things differently. We look different than almost any other, community foundation. We're a hybrid. We're a hybrid very intentionally. We have donor advised funds, and we have a very handful of them. And we are probably one of a few organizations that very politely, direct donors elsewhere. If anything, compromises our integrity and our commitment to equity. We hold that sacrosanct. Our freedom, our ability to have a voice means that we can't take every dollar. means that, our relationship as an apolitical organization, our relationship with government has to be very, very linear. It can't it can't meander off the path of equity and transparency and accountability. And so for us, when it comes to just making sure that the issue of balance, the issue of the commitment to people first, putting people first, it's just one that we have compromised very little on in our 30 years.
And it sounds like you did so by examining sort of these different sort of systems and interactions, looking at the ecosystem in which you guys are operating, because obviously the investment activities that you receive, they more frequently come with strings than not. And so by tying those directly to the outcomes, the social performance indicators, if you would, of efficiency and equity that you mentioned, is so critical. I want to thank Laurie for correcting me. The book, Listen to What They Say, was by Lucilla Marble, whose grandfather was Buckminster Fuller, and that's where the Fuller came from. Thank you for that.
I want to just build on what Deanna said about when investments come in. Enterprise plays different roles in community development, recovery, where enterprise is an intermediary, gives funding out, operates housing, does a little bit of everything. And it's really important that when there are commitments to be made, that those commitments are realistic and are informed by communities on the ground. So when we have events, often this is a time where there's a lot of media coverage, and all of a sudden the world is paying attention to a community that perhaps has needed attention to be paid for many years. And we can't just, I would say my message to philanthropy is we need to, if we're going to resolve problems and find solutions, that they must be informed by reality, because what happens is we don't want funders to be driving the programs. When that happens, those programs will never succeed. We've never seen examples where they succeed, and we don't have, and I honor what Deanna's saying, because this is critical also with federal funding. Federal dollars need to respond to local needs. It cannot be the opposite.
And to kind of steer our conversation in this direction of innovation, what we saw very strongly during this conference is the kind of innovation across the islands, this sort of bottom-up support from individuals and communities, this respect for local knowledge, and the innovation that is occurring because of that. And it seems to be that the partners, the institutional partners, are connecting the dots and are actually stepping up and meeting this call. Has that been your experiences?
I'll start. They're coming along. I spend most of my days in a truly innovative space. One of the things that we learned with our nonprofits, we have a very large nonprofit sector on the island of St. Croix, and it's a very respectful sector. We knew that, some organizations knew that there were donors that support a specific, kind of work, and they would never tap that donor. But it wasn't until we decided to start convening them at one table. And it was, there was a lot of storming and noise in the beginning, because while people knew each other and respected each other, there weren't deep, intimate relationships. And we spent a year building those relationships. And when I tell you, it was just everything happened in divine order. We started that consortium exactly almost to the day before Hurricane Maria. And when Hurricane Maria, and it was like a listening tour for us. We had a schedule. Everybody had to come to the table, sit down, commit their time on a very regular basis. And we did that for a year. There was no agenda. There was no okay, we're going to start, developing program together. We are going to start nurturing collaboration. It was just being in relationship with each other. And then the hurricane happened, and everybody was like, oh, we get it now. Because those relationships were there, the level of innovation, the level of collaboration that came, we had these very specific siloed sectors: arts and culture, health and human welfare, youth and education, and then the built and natural environment. And those sectors don't really mean anything now. organizations and people are working across sectors in some of the I feel like one of the single most privileged people in the Virgin Islands to sit in the spaces I get to sit in and just bear witness to what happens when people are in relationship with each other, what kinds of problems can be dissolved and resolved very, very quickly when people understand the community that they're serving and are in relationship with each other.
And these kind of conversations, we didn't have to coach people. They came naturally to it. I think that people understand that we are in a different place and time, not just post disasters, because we've had our share of them in the last few years, including the present one, or present ones. But I think that there's a will to come together and bring the best of yourself and the best of your organization to recognize, really, if we're strong together, we're stronger ourselves. And I think that's really critical. Laurie?
There's a great quote, Deanna, that you're making me, which I live by, that resilience will only move at the speed of trust. And we see it again and again and again. It doesn't matter if you're in the White House, if you're in the local hardware store, if you're at the local grocery store, the hospital. When you have relationships and strong relationships founded on integrity, you will always find that those will pull you through. And it's also worth noting, it's very important to always honor those relationships, because when they go wrong, or if you don't respect and honor them, the opposite will occur. So it must move at the speed of trust.
You know, and in all of our work in community development, I think we would agree that community development work is important, but it produces the kind of trust that you are talking about. Strong communities produce that trust. Strong communities produce wise and strong children. They produce secure streets and secure neighborhoods, because there is this cohesion and fabric that exists in these strong communities. So I think our work at the, not hyper local, but the local level is so important, especially for climate adaptation and climate resilience, because those solutions have to come local, even though we'll have institutional partners who might support our local municipal governments or our state agencies. Obviously, they come together, but at the end of the day, if those trust pieces aren't there because our communities aren't strong, where are we going to be? So this is also very, very hopeful, because we're seeing these communities become very strong, given the most trying and difficult set of circumstances, certainly. I think that we all also are, in addition to being hopeful and optimistic about the future, I think we can also share, everybody who was here this week, their love of place and their love of the Caribbean. I remember talking to Diana a couple days ago, and you said, I just love the Caribbean. You grew up on the Virgin Islands. You were born there. I was not born in Puerto Rico, but I am an islander. I was born in the UK. So I've got this island thing going on somewhere. I love islands, what can I say? But they're very special places, and they are, I think, the grounding point for future adaptation strategies. What we are learning in the low-lying islands of the Caribbean and the Pacific will be lessons that will transform other community responses as climate change continues to transform our coasts, can transform our inland areas get hotter. We're going to see the lessons that we've learned and the documentation that we've created of these processes here in the Caribbean extend. So it's a very exciting place to be, as well as a lovely place to be, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I'll just say that I feel really privileged. I do. I feel really blessed to come from this place. I think that, I'm hyper protective of place. I'm just incredibly, I feel like it's my purpose to use this work to advance the rights of people who have been disenfranchised and exploited and oppressed. And I feel like we, despite everything we've been through in the Caribbean, all of the people who call the Caribbean home now, we landed in one of the most pristine parts of the world with so many opportunities to live well and to live prosperously, even if it wasn't about money, but to live. I had a conversation yesterday with a group of folks, and we started talking about what our vision for the future is, and in the work that we've done with our consortium, doing like some real vision building work. And the vision that sort of evolved from that exercise was around simple abundance. Was about like really assessing people's welfare and well-being by through a different lens than the one that I think we've come, accustomed to, and looking at poverty differently. I think of one time I was on a cruise many, many years ago, and I sat at a table with some folks that, dinner, they place you at a table, and I was sitting at a table with some folks from Louisiana. And I think that day we had been in Dominica. And so we were talking about our experience. And I was just like, I have to come back here. This is like the single most exquisite place I've ever been.
Dominica.
And they were like, really?
Amazing.
Like, wow,
It's
that
gorgeous.
was like one of the poorest islands. We're so sorry. And I'm like, do you remember the smell of Dominica? Like, it smells like a pineapple. Like you get off the ship and you're like, oh my God, they feed themselves. They probably export less food than most other islands around them.
It's a third
import.
And it's a third the size. It's a third the size of Puerto Rico with 60,000 people.
Yes. And
so
it's just, and I was like, oh my God, we have to change. We have to shift our perspective on what wealth and what prosperity really means in the context of where we live and where we sit in this part of the world.
That's absolutely right. Well, we are running short on time. I could sit and chat with you all afternoon on the veranda somewhere, perhaps with a nice iced coffee or whatever your choice is. But as we close, I just wanted to share something from another book called Rising, in which the author, Elizabeth Rush, writes, "Sometimes a key arrives before the lock." And she is saying this as a way to remind herself to pay attention to her surroundings. And that's sometimes hidden in plain sight. She might discover that key that she doesn't know yet that she needs, but it's going to help her cross some important threshold down the line. And I would suggest to all of us who've been at the conference this week that we've had many, many opportunities to meet new people who may hold the key to something that we don't know. We have a lock that we need to open yet. And so I would challenge all of us to reach out to 2 or 3 of the people who you met in the networking sessions. And if you haven't met anybody, we have networking sessions right after this. You can jump into the networking tab there on the left and say hi to people, bring yourself on camera and chat. It's a good experience, never the same as being in person, but it is a great way to meet new people. And I met new people too. So I want to leave you all with this kind of call to action to reach out to some of the people you've met and extend this conversation over space and time. And I look forward to meeting you both again at some point in the future. And I want to thank you very much for stepping up and saying yes to talking with us this afternoon. It's just a delight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
David.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Bye-bye, Laurie.
Bye-bye.
Bye.